What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I try and help you guys keep on top of the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. This week is going to be a very domestic heavy episode. Normally we look at major international developments vis-a-vis China and other major countries, whether it's the US or its neighbors or the EU. But this week we're looking at several major developments internally, major decisions and speeches that were made from the top leadership that I think will have a massive effect on China and the world going forward. So we really do have to look at these developments and go through the analysis. So I think we should just jump in. This week, General Secretary Xi Jinping chaired a Politburo study session on global discourse power, 国际话语权. This is actually a very big deal that will affect everybody watching this to understand how we need to do some analysis. So what exactly was said during the study session? State media in the mainland reported on what the General Secretary expressed. Quote, Xi Jinping has stressed improving the country's capacity for engaging in international communication to present a true multidimensional and panoramic view of China. She stressed the need to have a profound understanding of how important and necessary it is to improve the country's international communication and to develop a voice in international discourse that matches with China's comprehensive national strength and international status. She stressed greater efforts to construct China's own discourse and narrative, interpreting China's practices by its own theories. End quote. How does General Secretary Xi Jinping suggest China achieve these objectives? Well, officially in the public statement, he listed a few policies, including, to quote the statement, carrying out people-to-people exchanges, cultivating capable professionals for international communication, studying relevant theories, and enlarging the circle of friends who, quote-unquote, understand China. Now, the Chinese version of the meeting statement from this week included some language that wasn't in the official English language readout. For example, there was a lot of Marxist language in the Chinese that was not in the English version, like public opinion struggle, a term from the Mao era, which has been used increasingly in recent years. The Chinese version also references the guidance of international public opinion, which is the same language which is often used to describe how the state manages the tight information environment here in the mainland. So what does this all mean? Well, put simply, it means we're about to see a massive increase in resources poured into China's international PR efforts, more than we have already seen over the last 18 to 24 months. State media, diplomats, think tanks, etc. have been and will continue to be tied to this international effort. But Western online platforms, social media platforms are also going to be part of that strategy. Now, more on this in a moment. But one more point on diplomacy before moving to media. Some in the Western media have suggested after this meeting that these statements from the Politburo, the study session, is signaling an end to the more aggressive form of diplomacy that we have seen coming out of the PRC in recent years, colloquially referred to as wolf warrior diplomacy by some. I am skeptical of this observation. I believe there is no evidence to suggest that this style will change anytime soon, as it is tied to the so-called Xi Jinping thought on diplomacy, which has been promoted heavily this year and which we've discussed in previous episodes of China Update. Now back to the media aspect. We will likely see official narratives more tenaciously pushed and foreign media stories that challenge this narrative more aggressively discredited or attempted to be discredited at least. Other speeches from officials like Wang Yi, Yang Jiechi, and Hua Chunying in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in the Central Committee in Beijing suggest that Beijing also wants to use more foreigners based in the mainland to push its international PR efforts. For example, Hua's call back in January for foreigners to, quote, employ their pens and cameras to faithfully and objectively report on the CPC's state governance, end quote. This is, of course, coming almost a year to the day that Beijing began expelling foreign journalists in large numbers. Though I can't be sure, my guess is that foreigners on social media platforms like YouTube will be employed by Beijing to push its narratives rather than the reliance on traditional journalists for these efforts. State media has gotten behind the call for greater international discourse power, 国际话语权, arguing that the only reason the PRC is facing a more difficult international environment is due to the West's dominance of information dissemination. Quote, the West is using its hegemonic advantage in the battleground of public opinion to launch stigmatization against China and forge a negative narrative of China. This has damaged the external public opinion environment for China's development. So in order to realize the national rejuvenation, China must solve this problem, experts said. End quote. Of course, the idea that the PRC is now facing a more difficult international environment may be due to its own behavior in recent years, and the international response to that behavior is not considered in these state media articles. In fact, I would argue that this inability to criticize state policy severely reduces PRC capacity to self-correct, and this has a systemic effect. When Wang Wen, executive dean of a top Beijing-based think tank, expressed this week, quote, Chinese leaders see that misrepresentations of China's image have led to negative impacts to core interests, end quote. That's all he can say, because to observe, for example, some of these international representations of China's behavior in recent years are accurate and causing concerns overseas would be problematic in the current ideological environment in the mainland. However, that being said, there are some that do believe this official narrative. In the mainland, outspoken academic Zhang Weiwei has long discussed the coming post-Western discourse era, 后西方话语 era, and the inevitable rise of the Chinese discourse system, 中国话语体系, which will be a hallmark of the new Sinocentric world order. Also, Professor Zhang argues. By the way, guys, if you're enjoying the video, if you're finding value with it, make sure you hit that like button. It's a massive help. It tells the YouTube algorithm that this is real content, which is very useful for a small channel like mine. And if you want to be just as informed as my clients when it comes to following China macro developments, maybe consider subscribing. And I want to take this opportunity to thank my Patreon supporters. You guys rock. Thank you so much for your support. Okay, let's continue. Next up, local officials have been desperately throwing resources at trying to prevent a small cluster of cases around the Pearl River Delta region, mostly in Canton, from escalating into a full-blown COVID outbreak, which could cripple an industrial megacenter representing about 1/3 of China's GDP. Concerns started last Saturday when Guangdong health authorities reported 13 new cases in the region. By Sunday afternoon, 21 asymptomatic cases were being reported as well. The next day, the city of approximately 15 million began shutting down certain districts and closing off high-risk neighborhoods. It was announced that people leaving Guangdong by plane, train, and bus or private car after 10 p.m. on Monday must present results of a negative test from the previous 72 hours. Testing stations for truck drivers were also set up on major roads. Every day this week, there has been about a dozen new cases reported, or officially reported at least. Locally, according to official reports, a major uncontrolled outbreak has yet to occur. However, they are still not out of the woods yet. We will continue following these developments here. General Secretary Xi Jinping chaired a special meeting to address what is now officially recognized as a serious aging population challenge. Quote, the meeting stressed that proactively responding to the aging population directly relates to the country's development and people's well-being, and it is an important measure to achieve the high-quality development of the economy and safeguard national security and social stability. The meeting called for efforts to raise the statutory retirement age in a steady and gradual manner, improve a multi-level system for pension and aged care, social protection, explore building a systematic framework for long-term nursing insurance, and accelerate the building of the systems for elderly care. The meeting demanded efforts to implement a third child policy in accordance with the law and to advance birth policies in alignment with relevant economic and social practices. Education and guidance should be provided to promote marriage and family values among marriage-age young people, the meeting determined. End quote. We can see from this language that the top leadership is very concerned about what the data in the latest census revealed about China's population structure. And of course, there is a possibility that there is data that was not made public that is even more concerning to officials. Now, I released a special video a few weeks ago that did a breakdown of the 2020 census data. If you click up here, it should go through this slide or this slide, I forgot, that discusses the census and does a full analysis of the demographic challenges that China is facing going forward. Domestic private media company Caixin provided an excellent analysis of the three-child policy that was released this week. I think it is worth quoting some of that analysis here. Quote, Chinese demographic expert Liang Jianzhang told Caixin that the policy change could be expected at most to bring an increase of a few 100,000 newborns, and the actual increase in fertility rate due to the policy would be unlikely to exceed 0.1. A representative of Zhai Zhenwu, a professor at Renmin University's Population and Development Studies Center, told Caixin that even if there were no caps on births, only about 300,000 additional newborns per year could be expected. End quote. Births would need to be at least 20 times that number to reverse the collapse in birth rates in recent years, a collapse that is likely to worsen over the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, that is this week's China update, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Throw your comments below. I always love to hear from you guys, and I will see you next week. Wherever you are, stay safe, stay sane. I will see you next time on China Update.